There was a push to have a separate press conference with just the premiers, leaving the Prime Minister alone with Dominic LeBlanc and Ambassador Kirsten Hillman, as I understand it, down at Old City Hall here in Ottawa. But over the course of the day, it has moved back to this joint press conference. So the gamesmanship was kind of the premiers determined to show a little bit of strength, though there was disagreement inside even the premiers' ranks that, look, we asked for this meeting, was kind of the argument. He agreed to this meeting. The goal here is to show a united Team Canada approach in the face of what Donald Trump is threatening to do. It looks petty and a bit political to be separate. Whatever happened in terms of the good judgment of the people at the table, they're now all going to be together.
And that probably the right signal to send, as we are just days away now from Donald Trump's inauguration and from this very serious and real threat of 25% tariffs being slapped on this country very, very quickly.
Why are we telling them it's off the table when things like oil and gas, things like critical minerals are actually the levers we can use? There was that going in, and it had many of us wondering how united they were going to be on the way out, which is, of course, what we're still waiting for. So they will look united at this table now all together in a row. What we're looking for is whether they sound more united. I will note yesterday, after Doug Ford met with Dominic LeBlanc, the change in tone from Doug Ford in the morning to Doug Ford at the end of the day was significant. So it'll be interesting now that they've all sat down together, this time, of course, with the Prime Minister, not just with Dominic LeBlanc, and all of them there, whether this will be a similar or even close to the same kind of transformation from what we heard this morning to what we might hear when they come out.
Thanks for that, Karina. And I'll bring you back into the conversation here as we wait for the premiers and the Prime Minister, as along with his cabinet ministers and ambassador. The last First Ministers meeting, I was reminded this morning when I asked smarter people than I, was February of 2023, and that was to discuss healthcare. The Prime Minister, in framing the conversation this morning, there was an agenda, obviously. He wanted to discuss opportunity, places where they could beef up and help the United States further, and response. And I'm sure people by now have seen this picture of Doug Ford walking into the meeting with a hat that was sent to him that said, "Canada is not for sale." In terms of what the response could be, David, obviously the retaliatory tariffs we've been reporting on extensively, and Katie Simpson's done a lot of that work. They have a list. There's a list ready to go. What else were they willing to talk about at this? Because it kind of depends on where you're from. Yeah,
look, I think the big thing that they have coming out of this is agreement, certainly from Doug Ford, that we saw yesterday with LeBlanc, that he called the border plan phenomenal. And there's a belief at the top levels of the government that, look, we've done enough and we have enough, that reason, lack of attention to the border for imposing tariffs, that is not a valid one anymore. Now, whether Donald Trump agrees with that, we'll find out on Monday or Tuesday. But where you're seeing the fissures within the Federation, the fracture points, is on energy. And we played that clip from Andrew Furey, the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, saying it's the queen in this game of chess, and you don't expose the queen until later in the conversation. Danielle Smith has warned that all options being on the table, if it includes anything that interferes with any kind of sale of oil into the United States. There's reports today out of Alberta that they're looking at setting up a crown agency to buy oil should export tariffs or export bans come into place, so they can send it into the U.S. because one level of government can't tax another level of government. She said that would be a threat to national unity because it would really cripple the Alberta economy. I spoke with Jonathan Wilkinson earlier today. He's in Washington. He says, yeah, that's an option. It's not an option we want to go to, and it's not one we would go with right away. The key thing is that Donald Trump says so many things. Not all of them come true. They are expecting some sort of trade action on Monday, but the response needs to be proportional. So while there's been this sort of political demand for them to lay out what is the battle plan, it's like, guys, like, you don't do everything in advance and reveal it until you know what it is you're fighting back against. Because maybe Donald Trump is convinced. Maybe the pressures and internal constituencies who recognize what a 25% tariff with your biggest trading partner will do to your own economy and your own affordability, maybe that convinces the president-elect to change course. But I don't know. There's reports about calibration, and bringing in tariffs at 2%, 3% a month and going up from there. This is something being considered sort of a boiling the frog approach. But essentially what I'm being told is they're going to work together. when they come out, this is from inside the room, work together, continue to try to prevent with border security and drugs and guns, work together on a range of measures if Trump does bring tariffs, including potential retaliatory measures. So the broad subjects that they were talking about going in are going to be the broad subjects coming out, and the details on the retaliatory stuff may have to wait until there's something to retaliate against.
Yeah, and to your point, we don't know exactly what he's going to do. Will it be 25% all at once? Will it be incremental? Will it exclude some of the things that are the most valuable to the United States? Oil, energy, critical minerals. We've heard from other premiers who are happy to consider export bans on that. Karina, there was also, from what I understand, some consternation inside the room about Danielle Smith's trip to Mar-a-Lago. She got a meeting, so she gets credit for that, but maybe not everyone is convinced that that was the best approach.
There was, first of all, we hear from sources that there was some joking going on when she appeared on screen, because she is on vacation, and so she appeared virtually with a few quips about, oh, is she in Mar-a-Lago? But then, from what we understand from a senior government source, there were a few premiers who pointed out to her that, first of all, it would have been nice to get a heads up, and second of all, that if she disagrees with people at the table about things, not to run off to the microphone and negotiate at a microphone, but to keep that inside the room, because Donald Trump looks for that kind of outward division, and so it's not helpful. So we did hear about that. I'm not sure it was very pointed. I'm sure it stayed, cordial, but they didn't stay mum on the issue at all. I should just also point out, just since you were talking about, what options they're looking at from a tariff point of view, but others, is we are told that we will not see a list today, that deliberately they will not be revealing anything because they don't want to give Trump anything to respond to before he puts on what he's going to put on. So we will not see the specifics at all today. And we also were told by a senior government source that Canada could be doing things in a graduated way as well. That one of the options is, a list of 3 things and then a list of 6 things, but also to remind Canadians that when Canada does put out that list, short or long, there still has to be a consultation period. So just because they announce it one day doesn't mean it goes into effect the next day.
Yeah, it is hard, David, there was also a conversation happening at one point, maybe a week ago, time is elastic right now, but maybe a week ago or so, where the government was considering publishing the list, actually as a sort of a signal to Donald Trump. Like, this is what is the problem. We know that some of the information has leaked out, so some of it is out there. So it's not really clear to me. I get that you want to see what he does before you have a heavy-handed response, but I'm also not sure that saying you're going to target, orange juice is what's going to make Donald Trump think twice. So we're at kind of a difficult spot where they've put this $1 billion in the border. Today there was a briefing where they announced more information around that. Helicopters procured, more drones procured, more people at the border freed up to do things. But it's not really clear to me what problem we're addressing, and I'm not sure that they know either.
Well, no, the problem they're addressing are the demands and whims of the president-elect, right? I mean, look, there is obviously drug trafficking and human trafficking across a border this long and between 2 countries and economies this large, and this unmilitarized and undefended, right? Which has been a source of pride in the relationship and is now becoming a little bit of a challenge here. So the Canadian officials will correctly point out that the volume of fentanyl going from Canada into the U.S. compared to the southern border and other sources, and even people going from Canada into the U.S. compared to other sources is a fraction, a very tiny percentage of it all. But, Wab Kinew, I think, had kind of the best line about it after one of the first minister phone calls about this. He said, you're not going to argue your way out of this. And that's just the way it is with Donald Trump. I mean, surely he has seen the data of what tariffs would do to the price of gas, to the price of food, to the price of housing, to the price of lumber, all of the things inside his country. His fight is with China, more broadly, in a geopolitical sense. And, the integration of the economies in the auto sector and food supply and in critical minerals and other things. You're shooting yourself in the foot as much as you're sending a message to Canada about any issues you have at the border. But none of that seems to be resonating, at least up to now, with the president. He hasn't said, okay, I'm convinced. In fact, he escalated the rhetoric to talk about, the 51st state and economic coercion. So when the federal government leaks out that they're looking at ceramics as one of the things, toilets being tariffed, which seems entirely appropriate given what's going on here, you've got a couple audiences. You have the American constituency, but you also have a domestic constituency to show that you're doing things, to show that you're taking it seriously, and to show that you do, in fact, have a plan. Because when you put all of this urgency around this economic threat that Canada is facing against the backdrop of the political crisis the government is with the Prime Minister essentially being pressured to resign and the uncertainty that creates and the kind of the political vacuum at the top. You still have a governing entity, but the political legitimacy of things is a problem. You need to demonstrate that you're doing something. And that's what a lot of this is, I think, to show to Canadians and premiers and reporters and Americans that Canada has a plan, Canada will respond. We're just trying the carrot first before you even bring out the stick.
And we are expecting this press conference to get underway in just a couple of moments, though we'll see how timely a whole bunch of politicians at one table are. Not only almost all the premiers, both Alberta Premier and the BC Premier were not able to attend. They attended virtually, but the other premiers will all be there at the table with the Prime Minister, with Dominic LeBlanc, Melanie Joly, and Canada's ambassador to the United States. Just days now before Donald Trump takes office. Undoubtedly, the Prime Minister and perhaps Melanie Joly will also be asked about the breaking news of the ceasefire in the Middle East after 15 months of war. The first steps taking towards that, beginning on Sunday and holding. So they'll be asked some questions, I'm sure, about that development as well that has been breaking news throughout the course of the day. Karina, did you hear anything from premiers on their way in about whether they were concerned about the Team Canada approach and whether it had concerns for them because of the fact that the Prime Minister is not going to be the Prime Minister for too much longer?
From what I heard, I didn't hear much about the Prime Minister not being, whether that being part of the reason why they were worried about the united approach. We have heard from that about before, both from Scott Moe and Daniel Smith, saying that we need someone in the Prime Minister's chair who has a strong four-year mandate to go up against Trump's four-year mandate and a strong mandate. But this morning, there was a concern about unity, and it sounded, to be honest, a little bit less about unity between Ottawa and the premiers and more about concern about discord amongst the premiers and that they need to get on the same page. There was also from the northern premiers, it was really interesting as they took on some of responsibility for themselves, saying that the premiers need to also, it can't be all about blaming Ottawa, but also that the what's happened because of Donald Trump shows how quickly governments can address issues, using the border as an example. So, one of the premiers, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting which one in the north, I believe it was Yukon's premier, talked about how, well, we've had the fentanyl problem and concerns about the border for a very long time. Suddenly there's a tweet from Donald Trump and, we spring into action and the country now has a $1.3 billion border plan. Whether it's addressing a real issue or not, clearly action can happen. And he talked about responsibility of all the premiers and the federal government about making sure that that they take responsibility for, hey, we could have moved on this faster. And so if there's other things we can move on, even if they're not things to appease Donald Trump, perhaps we should do that. And one of the things they did bring up was critical minerals and infrastructure, especially up north, in terms of access to those. So if we're going to talk about this being the future for Canada, we need to put the money where the mouth is, as the cliche goes, and actually build the infrastructure to be able to get to the critical minerals and the other resources that we say is our strong point.
Well, probably working in the Prime Minister's favor is that he has managed to keep cabinet ministers to be able to work on this file, whether it be François-Philippe Champagne or Melanie Joly or Dominic LeBlanc. Most cabinet ministers are choosing not to get into the leadership race, and so he has those people to help him on this file for the next couple of months. And indeed, there is a cabinet retreat happening starting on Monday and Tuesday, and basically the sole focus at that cabinet retreat will be this relationship and how they move forward. What do we know about sort of any kind of inroads they're making with people in the U.S. You know, I talked to Melanie Joly on Friday, I guess, and she's got this, you know, professional relationship with Lindsey Graham, and he seems to be opening some doors for her. But at this stage, I'm not clear on whether it's having any impact. I suppose you want to be getting the meetings. That's important.
Well, look, the thing is every politician I've had on my show, or a business leader I've had on my show who speaks to people in the U.S., they're not hearing from anybody, yeah, we think these tariffs are a good idea. We want these tariffs, right? But it all comes down to what Donald Trump does. And the people around him, from what we're hearing in their conversations with Canadian officials, is they're not saying one way or another, saying he is going to be the decider on this. Like, he is more powerful going into his second mandate than he was at the peak of his first mandate, because the team around him are unquestionably Donald Trump loyalists. So, you know, the arguments are data-driven and rational and based on long experience with what tariffs do to costs and what they do to trading relationships. You know, Jonathan Wilkinson met with people like Ted Cruz, for example. They all believe the tariffs are a bad idea, but they all believe that this is essentially a negotiating play by Donald Trump to put pressure on Canada to do things on the border. We'll see if that's what it is. People are extrapolating a lot of things from their conversations with him. And, you know, even Daniel Smith, who is the one Canadian we know, along with Kevin O'Leary, who did speak with Donald Trump recently at this Mar-a-Lago visit over the weekend, she came away convinced that tariffs are coming on Monday or Tuesday, right? So are you making inroads? Who knows? The goal seems to be not to avoid them entirely, but to keep them in place for as short a time as possible and calibrate your response in a way that Americans feel it without compounding the misery on Canadians.
Though I would point out that the plan or the strategy heading into November, into the election, was to prevent the tariffs from even happening. So now we've moved beyond that. Now there's a recognition that the tariffs will likely happen, and whether it is as high as he has been threatening and as quickly as he's saying is the other question. I'm going to bring in the CBC's Katie Simpson, the senior Washington correspondent, who's been doing a lot of work on this on the other side of the border. Katie, where would you say we are at right now in terms of whether this is going to happen and how quickly this is going to happen?
Well, that is the thing that the Canadian government is urgently trying to seek some clarity on. Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, the energy minister, he's on one of these trips to Washington, D.C. to speak with Republican leaders. Melanie Joly is expected to travel to Washington, D.C. To speak with American leaders, because no one really has a sense just yet of what exactly might be coming, other than to point to the public statements that Donald Trump has been making. One thing I have been hearing from sources is that this go-around, the Trump administration, that people around Donald Trump are really deferring to him. The big decision-making power really lies with him, whereas in previous times, there would be some delegation and there would be some, way to get some assurances at different levels. But this go-around, it really seems that it's all coming down largely to Donald Trump and wherever the influence around him lies. So that is a big thing that the government is still trying to seek some clarity on. And we've been saying it quite frequently, but it may not be clear exactly what it is and when it's going to happen, or when it can sort of start building in, or whatever it's going to be, until Donald Trump sort of sits behind the Resolute desk in the Oval Office and starts signing those executive orders. So for a Canadian audience, we're going to have the big pomp and circumstance of a big day for Donald Trump, a political comeback in American history unlike any other. And then you're going to have Canadians sitting on their edge of their seat, particularly those in Ottawa, waiting to get the details, the text of, tens of executive orders that are coming out to see, okay, is there a tariff order in there? How does it affect Canada? And what else is in there that could have an impact on Canada? Yeah,
Donald Trump will be attending inaugural balls, and we'll all be sort of biting our nails here. David's got a little bit of news, so I'll bring him in. I'll come back to you, Katie.
Yeah, there's some reporting in the Toronto Star that aligns with what I'm hearing now from some of my sources who are in the meetings, that essentially Canada has said, the Prime Minister told the Premiers they would not immediately match U.S. tariffs dollar for dollar, that it would start smaller and move its way up. Because if you were to respond to a 25% tariff across the board, you're looking at $600 billion in essentially counter tariffs and economic hit to the Canadian economy. So the approach is being described to me as sort of like starting slow and moving up strategically, which aligns with what you had heard, I believe. Somewhere around, they discuss a package of about $150 billion in counter tariffs that could be deployed should it need to be. So the challenge with that is that you're hitting back to try to inflict pain on the Americans, but that also has a residual effect on the Canadian economy. And this is the squeeze you're in, right?
Yeah.
When it's Donald Trump and the economy that large, that, in the aggregate, the impact to the U.S. economy might be on a dollar value greater than it is to the Canadian economy, but spread across a much larger economy and many more people, so they don't feel it as acutely as we would across a population that is much smaller and an economy that is much smaller.
Yeah, and that's why we should also listen when this press conference starts to see what kind of potential supports, government supports, will be given to different Canadian sectors that might be adversely hit or hit more than others. Katie, when you were reporting on the retaliatory tariffs, it didn't seem like clear that the government wanted all of that information out there. Some of it obviously came out, but what's the strategy behind having that list and what they're trying to target and the message they're trying to send there?
Well, the concern is that are you going to provoke Donald Trump even further by pushing back with threats? Some people who know how Donald Trump thinks and how he operates suggest that that is not a very great idea, that Donald Trump is the kind of person that doesn't back down from a fight. And if anything, it could end up escalating things. So there was a debate in and around sort of senior Canadian government officials about, how exactly do we go about, letting the Americans know that, yes, we will have to respond, there will be retaliation, also giving Canadians a heads up as to how their lives could change as a result of any sort of tariffs. So what we were able to learn, according to a senior Canadian government source, is that they have a whole list. And what happened when Donald Trump won the election, and this is something that's sort of an ongoing process, is that bureaucrats in Ottawa, they sort of go through different lists of different things that are imported from the United States. This is what happened back in 2018 when, of course, there was that brief tariff war between Canada and the United States all around the NAFTA negotiations. What they do is they sort of come up with a list of all of these goods, all of these imports, and they sort of get down into the specific details. Okay, where is this production facility based? What is the good and service here? What they want to do is create maximum political pressure, so they pick places that are politically important. So we learned about Florida orange juice being one of those possible tariff items because they want to send a message to leaders in Florida. Florida is the new center of American power. Donald Trump calls it the White House of the South, Mar-a-Lago. And so, that would be aimed to sort of send a message that way. At the same time, Canadian officials are very reluctant they're very concerned about what the economic impact could be in Canada. Mm-hmm. They want to make sure that whatever products they select, that Canadians can find Canadian alternatives so it doesn't increase the price of living for Canadians. Because remember, a tariff is usually passed on to the consumer, and that's why this whole thing is considered so devastating at a time of great economic cost of living crisis.
For sure, yeah. I mean, it would affect individuals, certainly. It would also risk tipping the economy into a recession here in this country. We are told we've got about 5 minutes now until the press conference gets underway. This is our special coverage of the First Minister's meeting here in Ottawa, meeting after premiers asked the Prime Minister for a meeting to discuss a Canadian response to Donald Trump. He, of course, being inaugurated on Monday. It comes, of course, as well as the breaking news that there is a ceasefire deal taking hold in the Middle East after 15 months of war there. So undoubtedly, the Prime Minister will also get a question about that significant development. David, okay, so they're going to have some sort of tariff response that it will go up incrementally. They'll have the things that Katie's talking about on a list. And if that doesn't work, the export bans or the export taxes, those are completely off the table, because it seems to me that if you're trying to find leverage, you would take the thing that is the most needed. I'm no negotiator, but that's what I would do. Take the thing that is the most needed and say you're not going to get it anymore.
Yeah, I think that is on the table, but it's way at the back of the table, and that is the break glass in case of real emergency. Not that a 25% tariff isn't an emergency, but just game it through that, a prime minister who is already, and a government that is already unpopular in energy and commodity-based provincial economies, taking that step over the objections of people like Premier Daniel Smith, you're going to have some real problems. And just the economic hit coming back, that is enormous, right? That if that Alberta oil can't go in to the United States or goes in with a extra charge at the border, that is going to have a seismic economic impact and a revenue impact on all levels of government. But when you get to that point, it's because it is so far gone. But I think the hope is that for it to get to that point, the Americans would also be feeling it, and they'd be running out of things. And just think about, maybe Donald Trump does something with tariffs where, oil is carved out, critical minerals is carved out, and car parts are carved out, just because it's too much of a hit to the U.S. economy to do it otherwise. You then lose some leverage and need to find a way to hit back because, those big sectors are core to the Canadian economy, and you don't want to do anything to hurt them in the absence of that. But then all the other sectors that are hurt, you've got to stand up for those. So this has been the challenge along the way, in that you see premiers and other political figures using the challenges in the Liberal Party of Canada and the Prime Minister's office, the threat of Donald Trump, to kind of advance their own political agendas and whims. Like a lot of people see Doug Ford using this as a possible excuse to call an early election, right? So it is, can they pull together coming out of this and then keep it together going ahead? The calibrated approach with Doug Ford and his tough talk and his hat, I don't know if they're all going to come out with one of those Canada's not for sale hat today, but will Doug Ford be happy with a not going dollar for dollar, because he has been aggressive on this in a way some other premiers have not, right?
Yeah,
so
and spending millions of dollars too in advertising and sending people down there. Karina, what will you be listening for in this press conference that'll get underway very soon?
In addition to everything you guys have outlined, I do want to find out what the discussion was like about supports for workers and sectors.
Yeah.
I don't know how specific they'll get in terms of numbers or what areas they're most concerned about, but that's something certainly that was on the top of Doug Ford's mind yesterday at his news conference. And, for a government that already is stretched deficit-wise and post-pandemic costs of that, when you have a premier such as Doug Ford saying this is like the pandemic and we need to step up like we did with the pandemic, that's a big price tag.
It is. Okay, there's everybody making their way to their special places behind their flags. We'll come back to everyone after this press conference. Katie, Karina, David, thank you so much for this. Again, this is the first ministers' meeting, the first since 2023, a meeting that was to come up with a response to Donald Trump.
For being here today. Before I begin, I just want to say a few words about the ceasefire agreement that was just reached between Israel.
Okay, we're just having a little audio technical issue here. The Prime Minister was just about to start talking about the ceasefire deal that has been reached in the Middle East after 15 months of war, expecting that to take hold on Sunday. And again, for the fighting to stop and hostages to be released. We're trying to get that signal back up and running so we can hear more about what was discussed behind closed doors with First Ministers today, starting at 11 a.m. They've been talking about, of course, how to respond to Donald Trump's arrival on Monday for a second term in office as president, and with the very real threat of 25% tariffs on Canadian exports. He also has, of course, in recent weeks talked about making Canada the 51st state. He's talked about some sort of economic annexation of Canada, all things that have been driving the rhetoric and the conversation around this to places of really deep and grave concern in this country from all quarters, certainly from politicians, but also from business leaders as well, because the impact of the tariffs, forget the other threats, that whether they are real or not, the impact of the tariffs would be, everyone agrees, fairly devastating on this country. Any update here on where our signal is? No, okay.
No,
we'll jump in when we
it's
get
all
it.
networks.
It's all networks. Okay, so no one's ahead of us.
So don't touch that dial. Everybody's down. Everybody seems to have lost the feed. So I'm trying to alert people there in the room, because if
Prime
the
Minister
Prime
might have
Minister
started
says
again.
it to the premiers and like Chris Rands, who we know is there, then they might want a larger audience and they may want to reset and restart on that sort of a thing. But I don't know if we're going to get updates from people who are there in terms of what is being said, and this is what we're kind of like frantically trying to figure out now. But after this starting late, them changing the plans, and then the feed going down, not exactly the
Not
way
clean,
Team
not
Canada
super
wants to
clean,
send
no.
its message to the country.
No, this is our special coverage of this. We should tell you that Power and Politics will, of course, pick up at 5 o'clock with coverage of this and the ceasefire deal in the Middle East. Lots of things going on today. But this one, a pretty critical story domestically, and has been the focus of this country since Donald Trump was elected back in November. And certainly the pressure on the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister because of the arrival of Donald Trump for a second term in office has been very intense as well. There has been conversations inside the Prime Minister's office that this allows the Prime Minister to really focus on this issue in a way that perhaps he wasn't going to be able to do. But now with just a couple of months left, he can give it his full attention. And certainly there are members of his cabinet who are not running to be a Liberal leader either, who can also keep their attention squarely on this very real economic threat from our biggest trading partner, someone who we continue to call our closest ally. And indeed, the Prime Minister talked a little bit about that earlier this morning before TV cameras were asked to leave. He talked about the opportunity. He talked about the border and the things that have been done and announced at the border, $1.3 billion there, including 60 more drones, more helicopters, more personnel, more technology, all invested to try and address the concerns of Donald Trump around the border. We are waiting to give you that press conference as soon as it pops up again, just some technical issues. Maybe I'll go to Katie on that issue of the border, Katie, because obviously that was one of the issues that the president-elect flagged as wanting addressed. If Canada cares about this, they will take care of this issue. Now we've taken care of the issue, real or not, because the fentanyl issue is not quite as depicted, and it's unclear whether that has had any resonance for the president-elect.
Yeah, so the way that Donald Trump sort of lumped Mexico and Canada together, even though the situations at the northern and southern border are very, very different, it didn't change really anything for Canada other than the fact that it had to sort of put on a big demonstration to show, okay, you have concerns about this. We want to hear your concerns, and here's how we're going to address them very specifically with a plan. They put a really big number on it, $1 billion US in spending, so that it would make its way. That plan could resonate in and around Trump's world. The big question is whether that has actually satisfied Donald Trump and whether his team was actually just looking for some sort of win before he came into office. Yeah. At the time that Canada made that announcement, spending more than $1 billion Canadian on changes to improve border security, Donald Trump's team, the incoming transition team, they noted it in their newsletter. They sent out press release. They noted it on social media. And was that really what Donald Trump's team was looking for, to say, hey, our guy's not even in power yet. Look at all this change he's creating to make America safer and to make America a better place. We told you it was going to happen. Now, Canada, even though there's a lot of change going on in Canada, and this is the plan presented, and that was the understatement of the year, when Canada presented this plan.
Okay. Katie, I've got the press conference back. Let's listen in live. Thank you for that. Okay.
Nos propres valeurs. On est d'ailleurs le seul membre de la francophonie sur un continent où habitent des centaines de millions d'anglophones, et avec ça vient toute une histoire.
This comes with an entire story and a distinct culture that we will always stand for.
But I do believe that Canada is the best country on earth, and there's nowhere that I or the vast majority of our 41 million strong family would rather be. And that's why I gathered us all here today, the federal government, provinces and territories alike, working with businesses, labor, and civil society to stand up for Canada. Thank you all for being here. I thank the premiers for being here especially, and I'm happy now to turn it over to the head of the Council of the Federation, Doug Ford. Doug.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, Prime Minister. The ministers as well, Minister LeBlanc, Mr. Jolie, and Ambassador Hillman, and all the premiers. This is truly a Team Canada approach that we're taking. And I just can't emphasize it enough about staying united as Canadians, standing up against these tariffs. Things are going to change in a week. when the inauguration happens of President Trump, and if he moves forward with these tariffs, there's never been a time that's more important for Canadians to be united, to stand up, and making sure that our voice is heard. And the retaliatory tariffs need to be hard. We have to send a message when someone comes up and tries to destroy our economy. It will be devastating for Canadians. And that's why it's so important. It is so important that our federal government, our provinces, we support the hard-working frontline people, people that may be affected by the tariffs. But I can assure, I'm speaking for Ontario, I can assure the people of Ontario that we will be there for them. We'll be there to support them. And I'm pretty sure what I heard is everyone feels the same, no matter the territories or the federal government or the provinces. And I'm just so proud of everyone today. This is an opportunity for Canadians to stand up and be proud. Even when it comes down to going into your local retailer, look at the back of the label. If it doesn't say Made in Canada, pick the can beside it that does say Made in Canada. And that goes to our retailers, a message to all our retailers, all the grocery retailers, other retailers. Start onshoring goods to Canada. Start looking at Made in Canada. If we get hit by a tariff and our costs go up, I'd rather pay a few more cents to go to a Canadian supplier, someone that's producing right here in Canada. If you remember back in the pandemic, when President Trump cut us off on the N35 masks, everyone remembers that? We went and said enough is enough, and we brought 3M with the cooperation with the federal government. We onboarded them in Ontario that we can serve the entire country. We should never be reliant on anyone. We're the greatest country in the world. We're an economic powerhouse. There's nothing that we cannot build collectively across our great country. So I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank the people of Canada for standing with us, and we will never, ever give up. We're Canadians, we're proud Canadians, and Canada is not for sale. Thank you.
We'll now begin the question period, 30 minutes of questions, one question, one follow-up. First question.
Bonjour, Fanny Olivier de Radio-Canada.
Fanny Oliver, Radio-Canada. My first question is for Mr. Trudeau. Are you willing to act on the price of oil to convince Trump, even if it involves going against the will of some provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan? First of all, we've said it. Everything is on the table. We had a really good discussion around the table today with representatives, passionate representatives of all corners of the country. We agreed that we must respond to the challenge we are facing, but we must also ensure that the burden is shared throughout the country. We cannot punish one region because this region would have more impact on the U.S. We will be equitable and fair, but we also know that we will be resolute. Canadians want, and we all want, respond firmly. Otherwise, if in the case that the Trump administration goes ahead and their tariffs, we don't even know it's going to happen, even though it's likely, although it's not sure. As long as it is not done, we cannot know exactly what we will do.
We had an excellent conversation today from around the table with passionate Canadians who are proud to represent very different regions of the country, but who are all united on one thing, which is we will stand up for Canada. We will protect Canadians. We will make sure that we are there to show what this country is made of. At the same time, we've also agreed that no one region of the country should disproportionately bear the burden of standing up for all other Canadians. We have made it very clear that everything is on the table as potential responses, but we've also been very, very clear that it has to be fair across the country. If the American administration moves forward with its plans on tariffs, it will first and foremost hurt American citizens and American consumers, but it'll also hurt Canadians. And Canadians need to stand together to make sure we're there for each other, particularly those who may be carrying a heavier load than others because of what the American administration might do.
Et pour vous, Monsieur Legault,
Question for Mr. Legault. This morning you said that all responses are on the table. Does that not go against what your energy minister, Ms. Frechette, has said? Let's be clear. I just want to ask if you're open to increasing the price of hydropower for Americans, like counter tariffs on exportation. First, the PM has just said it, we all agree. The best option is not to have tariffs. We will not make any announcement before tariffs are implemented south of the border. Now, if President Trump implements tariffs, nothing is off the table, including what we can do on hydropower. There are many ways to implement retaliation measures. We're not here to go into detail in what we'll do. We've talked about various measures, but what was agreed on was to not exclude anything.
Hello, Mr. Trudeau. Mackenzie Weir of the Global News. Do you regret not resigning sooner to allow your predecessor the opportunity to be able to deal with the situation with the Americans sooner? And for the premiers as well, Ms. Smith, I don't know if you're here, but Mr. Moe, do you think Mr. Trudeau's lame duck status makes Canada's ability to negotiate with the Americans more difficult?
The experience Canada had in renegotiating NAFTA in the first Trump administration demonstrated that when we stand together united, promoting Canada's interests, we can do very well, even against a larger trading partner. And that is the focus we have right now. Yes, the Liberal Party is having discussions about its next leader. But right now, our entire focus, and the ministers with me, and indeed all the premiers, is on making sure that we're protecting Canadians every step of the way. That's the job I was elected to do back in 2021, and that's the job I will continue to do until the day at which I am no longer doing it. But right now, my entire focus is on standing up for Canada and protecting Canadians.
Saskatchewan's been silenced again. A comment with respect to, at times, we are going to have differences in policy, whether that be at the subnational level between premiers up here, whether it be through from different provinces with the federal government. And I've never made any secret with respect to where we have differed on policy with the federal Liberal government and the Prime Minister at times, and been very open with Saskatchewan's position on those policies. Maybe that's why I probably could exclude myself today from entering the Liberal leadership race over the course of the next while. That, and I'm not bilingual. But more broadly, and I would say, thank you to Premier Ford and to the Prime Minister for coming together here today to have a very different discussion about those policies where we might not agree, but to have a discussion on how we move forward on what is a very significant challenge, not only to the folks that live in Saskatchewan, but to all Canadians. And there are points in this where we may have disagreements, but Canadians can be thankful that their 13 premiers, the Prime Minister, and a few federal ministers are coming together, not only to hash out and work through what those differences might be, but to understand where we can come together and what the process is over the next number of days and then up to the inauguration, and what our options might be post that inauguration period of time. This is our largest ally that we were talking about, and it's our largest trading partner. It's our most significant trading partner. That's not to say that we haven't had trade tariff disputes with the U.S. or other countries previously. And there is we've been through this before, maybe not as large and broad as what is being talked about now, but we have been through this before. And there is a process to the work that we must do. And I would say that today, that process involves each of us, whether we be a subnational leader or a part of the federal government today or months ahead, whoever that might be, is to ensure that North Americans are aware of the impact that these U.S. tariffs will have on all North Americans, in particular on Americans, and to ensure that everyone is aware, in particular those in the sphere of policy policy and decision makers in the U.S. are aware of the advantages that we have with the integration of the North American economy and the threat that any type of tariffs, whether they be north or south of the border, bring to our energy security, our food security, the manufacturing security that we have. It's provided, and that value is added on both sides of the border, and we need to double down on our efforts in engaging on those fronts. There's agreement at this table on all of those points, and so we may have policy disagreements from time to time, but there's things that we agree on, and there's times when we do have to come together to represent what is in the best interest of all Canadians, and we in Saskatchewan, we continue to be Canadians.
Mr. Trudeau, do you plan on running in the next election? And if you don't, what are you going to do when you're not Prime Minister anymore?
First of all, I want to thank Scott for that answer. It's rare I get such support. No, I do have to say that particularly those who've been around. Oh, sorry, I'm endangering your political fortunes by thanking you publicly. I do want to say that Scott and Doug and a number of the folks who've been around a while have been extraordinarily invaluable in these conversations, in this Team Canada approach. There's always a lot of politics going on around this country, but to know when to step up in the Canadian national interest and to know that that's what Canadians want to see is really is to the credit of everyone around this table. In terms of my own decisions, I will not be running in the upcoming election. As to what I might be doing later, I honestly haven't had much time to think about that at all. I am entirely focused on doing the job that Canadians elected me to do in an extraordinarily pivotal time right now. The U.S. inauguration and the weeks that follow are something that is of deep, deep importance to Canadians, and we are entirely focused on that as a team.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Next question.
Hi, Kat Tunney from CBC. A question for Premier Ford as chair. Just looking for a vibe check. Do you agree? How much do you agree or disagree with the government's plan to address the tariffs? And should we read into the fact that Premier Smith is not here as a sign that you're not all on the same page?
Well, first of all, I think we're united in a message. If we had our choice, we'd have no tariffs. I've been out there promoting two great countries. We'd be the strongest country, the richest country, the safest country in the entire world. I believe in shipping, in our case, more great nickel, world-class nickel down there. I believe that we should be sending more energy, more electricity. Sorry, but when you have someone that's attacking our country, trying to take livelihoods off people, I'm going to fight like you've never seen before. So that's what I believe in. Sorry, I'm choking away here. Go ahead.
Well, if there are any dissenting views, I'm happy to or interested in hearing those as well. My next question is for, did you want to continue?
I will point out that Danielle did join us for the conversation and contributed significantly. She was unable to make it for the press conference. David Eby is here as well. But no, there will always be robust discussions around this table. Everyone has a job that is defending the interests of their own constituents, their own industry, as standing up for the national interest, but being able to come together on a consensus that has largely been supported, as you saw from the KK. This is a good thing. Okay. Évidemment, on a toujours.
Of course, we always have robust discussions. People are here to advocate for their interests, but they're also worried about pan-Canadian interests. This is why we were able to reach agreements that are very positive and
you were mentioning
statement that is agreed on by most of us.
Three political parties sitting down and we have a robust conversation. We may agree or disagree, but we're coming out united. I can tell you, spending a lot of time in the U.S., you would never see a group of Democrats and Republicans sitting here collaboratively. I promise you one thing, President Trump's office, a whole bunch of Democrats and Republicans saying, how can we attack Canada? It's not happening. We have the greatest country. We have the greatest elected officials, the greatest democracy in the world, that we can sit here from one extreme to the other extreme to in the middle. And I have always said, I don't care about political stripes. I don't care if you're from the orange party, the blue party, or the red party. We're going to be united. We're Canadian. We're going to get this done.
As a follow-up to the Prime Minister, is Ottawa considering any supports for industries and businesses that might get caught up in a tariff dispute?
Yes, absolutely. We know that in any response we give, some industries or some sectors might be more exposed or more affected than others. And we've made the commitment to do everything we can. And I know everyone around the table has agreed too, that if their region is less impacted, they'll do what they can to help out regions that are more impacted. This is not an attack on, or this is not a potential a challenge for one particular segment of our economy or one particular region in this country. This is an attack or an approach that endangers all Canadians and all of Canada. And on this one, we're all standing united in demonstrating that Canada speaks with a clear voice to defend the interests of Canadians.
Thank you. Next question.
Mr. Trudeau, you talked about the burden emanating from the tariff threats. We heard different point of views from different premiers regarding energy. So how did the consensus evolve before the meeting and after the meeting? And if you could answer also in English for our English colleagues. First of all, the consensus came from the fact that we still hope to not see these tariffs and be able to work on how to deepen our relation and have a strong and united North American against international actors that become more and more problematic. How to strengthen North America. This is our shared interest here. Then we talked about the phases that we could put in place depending on the different scenarios. We don't know what the measures will be by Mr. Trump, so we can't decide today what our next steps will be. But the first possible steps, we all agreed on unanimously.
I'm good.
Mr. Trudeau, how would we, in terms of energy, what are the legal tools to react one step at a time? As I said it, we still hope that there will not be tariffs imposed on Canada. We are the best partner and ally for the United States. We want to create a win-win situation. This is very logical and responsible. But regardless of the choice of the new U.S. administration, we will act, but we haven't decided what our specific response will be because we don't know what they will do. But we agreed on principles, and the principle is to make sure that there isn't a sector or a region that has to carry a heavier burden, and that's something that we all agree on.
So Paul Dutch, The Hill Times, to the Prime Minister and Premier Ford. Following today's meeting, was there an establishment of who speaks for Team Canada? Do all the premiers and ministers defer to one point person, or is everyone free to speak to their American counterparts themselves?
We have encouraged, and from the very beginning, encouraged all premiers, all Canadian business owners, all Canadians with any sort of interaction with the United States to engage on this issue and to speak up for the benefits of free and open trade between our two countries, the win-win, the amount of jobs that directly result from in the United States from things we do in Canada and vice versa. It is to be expected that everyone weighs in. It's actually one of the strengths of Canada that we have people from different political parties, different regions, different industries coming down with a similar message, which is we should be working together to create more prosperity on both sides of the border. Obviously, everyone tries to coordinate through our embassy in Washington to make sure that we're getting full information on the conversations that are being had to be able to be as strategic as possible. But it is actually more impactful when Americans see Canadians speaking from multiple perspectives, multiple voices, but standing up for Canada in the same way. That's the heart of Team Canada, and that's why we have such a strong approach on this.
As for the Yukon Premier, earlier today you said you wanted a blueprint about whose roles, who does what, who's in charge of what. Following today's meeting, do you feel have sense of that, of what roles are supposed to be done by everybody?
Yeah, I think that actually, yeah, just as that question came up and thinking about what was laid out today, I think everybody, look, I'll use a hockey analogy. I think when you talk about Team Canada, everybody can score goals in different ways. I think the key is that everybody is actually has a blueprint about what we are going to message. I think there was good strategy laid out, and I feel very good. Part of the goal here was to wake up tomorrow and understand what the role was as a premier, how we interact, how our levels of government will work together to make sure that we align. And as things become elevated, if they do, depending on what happens on the 20th, we have a clear understanding of how we'll work together and understand how each person's tools they put on the table can interact or can affect other jurisdictions, but at the same time, how they can be most effective. So I'm very happy with what I heard today.
Boris, pour le devoir, Monsieur le Premier ministre Trudeau.
Mr. Prime Minister, it seems that Alberta did not sign the joint statement. Ms. Smith also said that the federal government does not have jurisdiction to block oil export. The last thing we want to do is a jurisdiction battle. We all know that we have to answer in a robust way what this response will be. We still have to talk about it because we don't know what the U.S. administration will or will not do. When it comes to the statement, you should ask Ms. Smith why she did not want to sign it. We all agreed, and I don't know what her argument will be or what the disagreement will be.
Around the table is that we need to respond in measured but robust ways to the American actions, whatever they are. We can't know definitively what our response will be or can't announce what our response will be until we know definitively what the Americans are going to decide to do. We continue to hope that they will realize that tariffs on goods coming into the United States from Canada is just an extra tax on consumers in the United States. It's going to raise prices for consumers in the United States. That's not something that we want. That's not something that I think American citizens and consumers want. So we are united in wanting to move forward to make sure that these tariffs don't actually happen. In regards to why Alberta hasn't signed on the joint communique between Canada and the Council of the Federation, you'll have to ask the Premier about that directly.
I have a question for Ms. Premier Legault. Why did you decide to sign the statement? Should we understand that you would be okay with it if the Prime Minister of Canada asked you for national unity to cut on aluminum or hydropower exports?
Est-ce que ça fonctionne? Oui. Donc, la première chose qui était
the first statement in the release is that our first choice would be that there would be no tariff. As of today, we don't know what will happen next week or in the next few weeks. Our priority and first choice is to do everything for that not to happen. Now, if there are tariffs, then we'll have to see. Are they tariffs on everything? Tariffs on some products and goods? And then we can't exclude anything. We will have questions the answer. On which goods going in or out of Canada can we implement tariffs? It's too early to know what we'll do. The first thing is that we need to know what Mr. Trump will do, and then we'll make a decision among us. What I say is that everything's on the table.
If the idea in talking about this is to get Trump to back down and to have this not happen, why not come out with a dollar for dollar proposal right now publicly to show the Americans that we're serious and pressure them to back down on this?
First of all, as we said, everything is on the table, and I support the principle of a proportional dollar for dollar response. That is not the question. The question that we ask ourselves, first and foremost, is if the new administration chooses to bring in tariffs, what is it that we can do that will result in the lifting of those tariffs as quickly as possible? That is first and foremost. And what we're doing right now, what we have been doing for weeks, is engaging with the American administration to highlight the investments we're making in our shared border, to respond to concerns that they've expressed. We've laid out a number of different things that matter to them. We know that the last thing the new administration wants to do is raise prices on American consumers for all sorts of goods. But that will be the consequence of these tariffs if they come in. So we are both trying to prevent them from coming in, and if they do come in, we will try to get them lifted as quickly as possible. And like I said, we will use any and all tools necessary as a country to stand up for Canadians.
And I understand Danielle Smith has posted online her sort of reaction to this and why she didn't sign the communique, saying she can't support what's going on today because the idea is still being floated about putting an export tariff on our oil and gas. So what's your reaction to that? Why were you unable to bring her on board with this?
Doug, you want that?
Well, that's what's unique about our group. Everyone has their interest at heart, and I respect Premier Smith. I respect that she's concerned about protecting her energy, and that's her choice. That is her choice. But I have a little different theory. I have a different theory that protect your jurisdiction, but country comes first. Canada's a priority. And I don't believe in jeopardizing one sector or another. Premier Smith's oil is Ontario's auto sector, right? So again, we all have different views, and we can respect each other's views. But at the end of the day, when the tariffs come, it's going to affect Albertans. It's going to affect people from BC and Saskatchewan and Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, all the way down the road. No one's exempt from that. And all I believe in, if it comes to that, let's have the tools in our toolbox to react, to send a strong message. But it's not going to be all of a sudden one province or one territory is exempt on this. When Donald Trump comes at us, he's not going to say, well, let's not worry about Ontario, they're good people, or Alberta. He's coming full tilt at Canadians as a whole. And that's one thing we have to understand. We need to be united. Donald Trump is a brilliant negotiator. That's what he's done his whole life. That's exactly what he's done. And he's sitting there with a big smile on his face thinking, wow, I'm going to divide and conquer. Remember one thing, united we stand, divided we fall. We need to be united.
Can I jump in there?
Just a sec. Well, I'll pass over to you in a sec. I just want to point out something in what Doug Ford just said. Doug, the incoming American president specifically and has explicitly targeted one industry in Canada, one sector of the economy, and it's not the Alberta oil industry. It's the Ontario auto sector. It's an auto pact that has been incredibly successful for 50 years in building cars on both sides of the border that benefits both Canadians and Americans. That's the target. But you don't hear Doug saying, oh, no matter what, we got to protect the auto. Yes, he does say that, but it's not at the expense of everything else. He's just pointed out that he's a Canadian first, as much as he's passionate about Ontario. And I think that's something that we all share across this table, of saying, you know what, the interest of this country means we're going to have to look at everything we can, and we'll make sure that it's fair across the country, but nothing can be off the table if the U.S. continues to choose to move forward with these punishing tariffs on both Canadians and Americans. Sorry, Wap, didn't mean to.
Yeah, no, thanks for convening the meeting today, Prime Minister. And Doug Ford, you're doing a heck of a job as the chair of the premiers this year. You're communicating in a straightforward, direct, straight up kind of way that we need right now. And great hat. I hope they make that in an orange as well. Maybe able to wear that in the prairies.
I'll pass on the red one.
Yeah. I wasn't going to make the red hat joke, but Prime Minister, you made it. What I did want to say is that there is unity amongst the premiers of the provinces, the territories, the federal government. And where we have unity is that we're going to stand up for your jobs and we're going to make your life more affordable. We want to keep standing up for our economy. And we're also united on the fact that Trump's tariff tax is going to make life more expensive in the United States of America for the average American person. So I'd hope that Canadians look at the meeting today and feel a lot of pride. I hope that there's Canadian pride in the fact that you can have Liberals and Conservatives and New Democrats and nonpartisan leaders coming together to stand up for your jobs and for your way of life. And I hope that that sense of pride that we have a Canada with a functioning political discourse like that spills out into the broader society, so that when you go to the store, that Canadian pride leads you to buy that made in Canada product. That when you make your big decisions, that you choose to make investments here. We need a national economic strategy that builds on the pride of the worker who builds things and makes things in this country, so that our kids and our grandkids are going to have a much more prosperous, even more prosperous Canada than we have today. And I'd hope that your Canadian pride also filters into your decisions about where to take your vacations this summer. And to spend some more dollars here at home. Manitoba is beautiful. In the summertime, you have an open invitation, and now we're all going to trip over each other.
Minister wants us in Shediac.
Inviting everybody to the respective regions. Winnipeg Jets may be on a playoff run.
Okay, come on, Wap.
But the point is, Canadian pride is something that we can really lean on right now. And there are few things that unite Canadians more, for better and for worse, than our neighbor to the south. And so right now, as you see leaders coming together, I think it's a great moment for Canadians to come together as well.
Thank you very much, Premier. This will be the last question.
My question is for Prime Minister Trudeau. This is the end of your mandate. Has your political position been deleterious to Canadians? No, quite the contrary. The fact that I can set aside partisan politics and focus on the well-being and the interest of Canadians, and to leave a strong, united Canada ready to face any challenge is a great opportunity for me to work with my colleagues without worrying about partisan politics. This is an opportunity to deal with an important issue. On health, 2.5 billion in job cuts. Some people worry about the quality of services. What do you tell Quebecers? Can you commit to keep these funds in the network to keep it afloat? First things first, in health, since I've become Premier in 2018, we've increased the health budget by 50%. There was a considerable increase each year, including this year, 2024-2025. The financial year ends in March. There is no question to reduce this budget, but we are asking the network not to go over budget. This is just good management.
That concludes today's press conference. Merci tout le monde.
Okay, and that is the closing press conference of the First Minister's meeting happening here in Ottawa today to discuss a coordinated response to Donald Trump. He, of course, is being inaugurated for a second term on Monday. We'll get to the details of that, but you also heard the Prime Minister mention off the top, or perhaps you didn't because there were some technical issues. He did mention off the top the breaking news in the Middle East, that after 15 months of war, Israel and Hamas have reached a ceasefire deal. The deal outlines a 6-week initial ceasefire phase, including the gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza and the release of hostages held by Hamas in exchange for Palestinian detainees held by Israel. The deal does not guarantee a permanent truce at this point. There will be negotiations for a second and third phase. Remember, this war began on October 7th, 2023, when Hamas militants stormed Israel, killing around 1,200 people, taking more than 250 hostages. Israel then began a military campaign in Gaza determined to destroy Hamas. Health officials in Gaza say over 46,000 Palestinians have since been killed. And the Prime Minister of Canada, as I said, began his remarks today by saying Canada stands ready to do whatever it can to ensure the success of this agreement. We'll, of course, have more reaction and response to this ceasefire deal throughout the rest of the day here on CBC News Network. But we'll turn our attention back to the news at hand, a long press conference from the Prime Minister and Premiers, and a lot of news in that press conference as well. The Prime Minister and the Premiers at that table, there was one not at the table, saying that they are very much united in their approach to Donald Trump, that everything is on the table in terms of a response, but they don't intend to outline the details of how they will approach this with Donald Trump today. They also said that the Prime Minister said very clearly, no one region should take the burden of standing up for Canadians. It has to be fair across the country. He also said that there will be measures in place to support sectors and businesses that are hit hard. But as I mentioned, there's one premier who was not there. She tuned in virtually for the meeting, and that is the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, who did not sign the joint press release saying that they were all on the same page. And I'll bring in David here to talk about what her reasoning was, and then the very interesting response from the Premier of Ontario.
Yeah, it was quite the moment there at that press conference,
Yep.
Rosie. Danielle Smith has always been the outlier in a lot of ways at the First Minister's table. She is refusing to sign on to the agreed-upon plan by the Premiers and the Prime Minister today, saying on her Twitter/X account in a statement saying that federal government officials continue to publicly and privately float the idea of cutting off energy supply to the U.S. and imposing export tariffs on Alberta energy and other products to the United States. Until these threats cease, Alberta will not be able to fully support the federal government's plan in dealing with the threatened tariffs. Alberta will simply not agree to export tariffs on our energy or other products, nor do we support a ban on exports of these same products. We will take whatever actions are needed to protect the livelihoods of Albertans from such destructive federal policies. So this is interesting, Rosie, because this was the Team Canada meeting to try to get everyone together to come up with a common approach. Danielle Smith, after all the premiers are saying we need every tool in the toolbox, every card in our hand, she says you cannot use Alberta energy as a tool or a card, whatever metaphor you're using. Doug Ford was asked about this, and he said essentially, protect your region, sure, but country comes first. And he said Donald Trump is not coming for Alberta or Ontario, he's coming for Canadians as a whole. And then the Prime Minister interjected to make the point that the only industry that Donald Trump has specifically threatened is the auto sector, saying we don't need Canadian-made cars, we don't need Canadian-made parts, we don't need the Canadian factories. We can move them all to Detroit, we can move them all to Michigan. So it is Doug Ford's core industry that has been the most targeted by the president-elect, but it is Danielle Smith, who did not attend because she's on vacation, just speaking with her office, trying to get her to come on the show. She says she's not doing any media until she gets to Washington because she is attending the inauguration on Monday. But in terms of bringing everyone together, they did that with a very noted exception of Danielle Smith. And we saw Doug Ford pushing back against that fairly aggressively.
Yeah, and we should say that up until the point that it was revealed that Danielle Smith had not signed the communique and sent out the tweet or the social media post, it did seem to be a very united group of leaders, very much aware that they need to do this together, that they weren't going to outline all their next moves here at this press conference, and also saying that everything was on the table. I was going to go to Karina, but I don't think I'm going to do that now. Yeah. I'm going to go to Katie.
Just one last thing, Katie. Sorry, Rosie, if I can, because I'm going to Katie. Yeah. At the end of her statement on her social media, there's a graphic that has a Canadian and American flag sort of as the backdrop put together. Says, no Ottawa tariffs on Alberta energy exports. So this is where this has gotten in terms of dealing with Donald Trump, what Danielle Smith is saying, her views and her role is on this.
Yeah, I mean, a bit of a risky move for the Premier of Alberta there to make herself the outlier and I guess the sole defender of Canada's oil and gas, because other premiers who are also potentially affected if everything's on the table reiterated that position. François Legault, hydroelectricity on the table? Sure is. We know that Premier Ford has said that. Scott Moe, not a close friend of Justin Trudeau's, certainly said that they don't agree on everything, but they agree that they need to have a strong, united approach to Donald Trump, with the exception, I guess, for now, at least, of the Premier of Alberta. Katie, I'll bring you in here just in terms of what you make of what you heard in relation to what you're hearing in Ottawa, sort of through that lens.
Well,
in Washington, sorry, Katie.
What really stands out to me, Rosie, is the fact that the federal government really doesn't know what Donald Trump is going to do. And that is also reflective of what's going on with conversations at very senior levels down here in Washington, whether it's Canadian cabinet ministers or the work that the ambassador is doing. There's still no clear understanding, no clear picture as to whether Donald Trump is going to go through with this. But obviously, everyone knows in dealing with Donald Trump, you have to take him seriously. You have to take him in his word. And what I know from sources is they look to his language. They look to see what it is he's saying. During the election campaign, he called himself the tariff man. He surrounded himself with people, particularly Howard Lutnick, who's coming into the very senior commerce role in his new administration, as long as he goes through the confirmation process. Who we understand is really leaning in hard in Trump's ear to say, listen, these tariffs are the way that we're going to generate revenue. This is the way that we're going to help rebuild things and pay for things. Because Donald Trump has a very expensive agenda coming up. He wants big tax cuts and he wants new immigration policies. It's all going to be expensive. So the thing that really stood out to me the most from the Washington perspective is that no one knows what Donald Trump is going to do.
Yeah, and you're really right to make that point too, Katie, that Donald Trump needs the money for some of his own projects. Katie, thank you so much for all your help with this. Of course, you'll continue to have lots of coverage of this, and you'll be part of the special on Monday at the inauguration. Thanks so much, Katie Simpson in Washington. Joining us now, the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, Andrew Furey. Premier, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for making the time after a busy day for you. So I guess I'll start with where the press conference ended. Danielle Smith saying that she cannot sign on to the communique because she doesn't like the fact that the federal government and others are still publicly and privately floating the idea of cutting off energy supply to the United States. What do you make of those comments, Premier?
Well, look, I think the energy that we provide the United States is key to any negotiations. And if I used the chess analogy earlier today. If you think about a chessboard, first of all, you don't start by taking pieces off the board. Energy is definitely our queen. We want to make sure that we protect the queen. We want to make sure that they know the queen is definitely on the board, though. As an energy-producing province myself, it's certainly not the first move that I would like to see. We're hopeful that it will never be a move. But I do stand united with all the premiers that we need to be negotiating from a position of strength, a position of sovereignty, and we can't do that unless everything is on the table.
And so what was that conversation like then? Because obviously everyone got to the page you're on, with the exception of the Premier of Alberta, who I suppose you could argue, Premier, has the most to lose if that's on the table. Was there an attempt to try and convince her or reassure her that that wasn't the first move on the chessboard, to your point?
I'm not going to disclose the conversations that we had in private. They were had in private for a reason. I think there is certainly, we don't want to be negotiating with the United States in public. I do think that we need to be negotiating from a position of strength. and part of our strength is our energy. If you look at the integration of the economies across the border, energy is crucial for them.
Yep.
Critical minerals is crucial for them. And we need to make sure that we're evaluating all of those in a very thoughtful, responsive, proportionally responsive way to whatever tariffs happen to come. And by the way, they're not just tariffs, they're going to be taxes for Americans. So we need to make sure that Americans understand that as well.
But does it hurt to not have one premier who is such a significant source of oil and gas for the United States? Is it damaging to the Canadian position to not have her on side?
Well, look, I think it's always better when we are fully united. Hopefully, the Premier will have a different thought once she evaluates the overall strategy of the country. Certainly, nobody wants to lead with a resource that is important in their own economy, me included. I don't want to lead with oil and gas. I don't want to lead with hydroelectricity. I don't want to lead with fish products.
No.
But that said, we need a united, strong front. Make no mistake, the President of the United States wants to see nothing more from an economic perspective, by the way, from an acquisition perspective, to see a fractured Canada. And we are largely united, strongly united, with a unified voice. And you saw that today at the press conference. There was many different voices representing coast to coast to coast and different political stripes. And I think that's incredibly important from a strategic position moving forward.
Premier, I'll let David ask you some questions because otherwise he'll get mad given that he's from your province. So, David, over to you.
Well, Premier, my question is to follow up on Danielle Smith. I mean, I know it's only one Premier out of the 13 that were there with the Prime Minister, but she's the only one who's been to Mar-a-Lago, and she's the one who has spoken directly with the President-elect and is plugged in with a lot of the political network on that side of the border. So what does this do to your ability to carry a consistent message to all the people you're reaching out to if the one person who can get into the room with the President-elect is not on board with the plan?
Well, first of all, David, she never said she wasn't fully on board with the plan. She said she wasn't on board with having export tariff on oil and gas products. So that's her opinion, and certainly she's entitled to it. But this negotiation has to happen in concert, constitutionally, by the way, with the federal government. They laid out a very strategic and thoughtful plan behind closed doors, and I think it needs to remain behind closed doors, but that contemplates regional sensitivities, industrial sensitivities and specificities, in an approach to a retaliation to President Trump. Let's be clear, we don't know what he's going to say yet. Maybe he says nothing, in which case this is all moot. But I do think it's unwise and premature to take pieces off the table in a game that hasn't even begun yet.
But this will undoubtedly inflame certain political constituencies with her saying that the federal government is refusing to rule this out. This is, she's put this out with a graphic that says no Ottawa tariffs on Alberta energy. This is not about Donald Trump in that. It is about Justin Trudeau, is about the federal government, is about Team Canada.
This has been part of my concern from day one on this negotiation. We need to make sure that regardless of the acuity of the issue in front of us and the fiscal and economic realities, that we don't put on the table our Canadian identity and our Canadian unity. And by the way, I'm not convinced that that's what the President wants. He wants to have a fracture in our unity, a fracture in our identity, so that he can propagate his agenda of acquisition on a global stage. So I think it's concerning that we have an individual who isn't fully united. But I would say this, it's not that she has made a statement on one specific item. And it's unfortunate that it's not aligned with all the other premiers and with the federal government at this particular moment in time. But as to why she did it or why she sees the need for Alberta not to participate in a strong and proud Canada, you would have to ask her that question.
Premier Ferry, thank you for making the time for a couple questions from your fellow Newfoundlander and from this gal from Manitoba. Thank you, sir.
Thanks very much.
Appreciate it very much. That is the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, Andrew Furey, responding there to some of the news out of the First Minister's meeting. Does sound like most premiers and the federal government on the same page when it comes to their approach to Donald Trump, starting on Monday when he becomes president for the second time. But Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta, is saying she can't sign on to that final communique because she has concerns that when everyone says everything's on the table, that does include oil and gas. And she's made it clear in a tweet on social media that that's simply not possible. Thank you for watching this special coverage of the First Minister's meeting in Ottawa. David Cochrane is, of course, sticking around to do his show and continue our reporting on Power and Politics. And he will also, of course, have the latest news on the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal that was announced today. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thank you so much for watching our special coverage. Power and Politics picks up right now.
Hi there, this is Power and Politics. I'm David Cochrane in Ottawa, where we're tracking two major developing stories. With Canada's economy facing one of its biggest threats in decades, the country's premiers and prime minister huddle in Ottawa